Okay, Rambam Sefer Misvot, Misvot Azeh, positive commandment. We're up to Misvah Samech number 60. And after we got through the Misvot, dealing with specifically with Pesach and Korban Pesach, Pesach Sheni, we spoke last about the Misvah of blowing the trumpets during the time of bringing the Korbanot of the holidays and other times of the year as well. Misvah Samech, we're still in the general realm of giving korbanot and the misvot of korbanot. And now we're going to talk about some conditions for korbanot themselves and segueing into some accessories of korbanot. So misvat samech, he shesivano shihye kol korban shenakriv min habehema ben shemona yamim o yoter v'lo pachot mehem. So every single korban that is offered has to have a minimum age, no less than 8 days. It can be older depending on the korban, but it can't be younger than 8 days. The title that Hachamim give, there's a few different types of mehusar zman, so to speak, missing or lacking time. And one of them is actual physical maturity, lacking time with physical maturity, lacking age. It's called mehusar zman begufo. What's the source? The Torah says 7 days by his mother, and then afterwards the Torah is going to say Yom Hashemini v'hala, as the Rambam will mention soon. So the first 7 days, stay with mom, not a korban. The mizvah was offered in a different form, and that is one pasuk says tachat, one pasuk says yihyeh with the mother. Same idea. And this mizvah is common for every single korban. There's not a single korban that can be brought prior to the age of 8 days. Uma'amar miyom hashemini v'hala yiraseh lekorban ishel Adonai yesh ra'aya shekodem ze lo yiraseh. So the continuation of the pasuk that says 7 days with its mother is, and the 8th day and on, it is accepted as a korban for Hashem. What does that imply, says the Rambam? That prior to that, lo yiraseh. Prior to that age, it's not acceptable. And what does that sound like to you? Not just a mizvat aseh, hine kvar hitamta hazhara. And we have now seen established really a warning of what not to do, implicit in the pasuk. Mehakrev mehusar ziman, bringing a korban prematurely. Aval, so that Rambam discovered something else. Now we're doing mizvot aseh. But he says, "Hulav haba mechlal aseh." There are some mizvot ta'aseh that emerge from the implication of a positive commandment. The fichach en lokin alav. So if you wanted to know, by the way, in terms of the negative commandment, would not come with it a physical punishment like malkut, because only an explicit negative commandment will get a physical punishment. Of course, positive commandments never get a physical punishment. Besides, we know karet, as we just read for Korban Pesach and Brit Milah. And therefore, someone who brought a premature Korban does not get lashes. As is explained in the Gemara in Masechet Zevahim. And there it identifies premature korban as a positive commandment. So the Midrash and the Gemara elaborates further. Misvat Samech Aleph number 61. Hisha Sivanu Shiye Koma Shenakribehu Shalem Bemino Tamim Min Hamumin. So this is another condition for korbanot. And that is every korban that we bring, regardless of what category of korban, in that particular species, it has to be whole, meaning it has to be whole from any type of physical blemishes. And is a list in the Torah of what constitutes a physical deformity or blemish or lacking of wholeness and completion in its body based on the standard of that species. שבאו בה כתוב ושאמרו בקבלה שהן מומין. And of course, in the Pesukim, there's a list in the parasha in terms of what's a blemish. And also, Torah Shebe'al Peh helps elaborate on that list. Where's the source for this? Torah tells us, Tamim yeh l'rason. It's only acceptable if it's Tamim. And Tamim here means whole in terms of its body. V'lashon Sefer, Tamim yeh l'rason, Misvot aseh. So really, it could sound like that phrase is one that is circumstantial. You're bringing a korban, it'll only be acceptable if it's full, it's whole. Rather, the Midrash tells us, no, that's actually a positive commandment. Tamim, it tells you you are fulfilling a positive commandment when you do bring it home. The Gemara brought a proof. Al hayot yenot nesachim ushmanehem v'asolet betachlit hatov v'hanikiyut min ha'hefsed. Proof that all wines, like wine libations, flour offerings, oil additives, fine flour additives should be the highest level, A grade, and completely void of any type of lacking. From Ma'amarot Timimi Lechem V'niskehem. As the pasuk says, they should be, meaning the korban should be tamim full, V'niskehem, and their libations, their additives. And that means, of course, there's no such thing as a blemish with flour or wine like there is with the body of an animal, but certainly there's something that's spoiled, something that's not clean, sifted from its sediment or dirt, etc. And therefore we know as a branch of this mitzvah that all the accessories of korbanot have to be the finest and the highest of quality as well. Tractate Menachot elaborates on the rest of the details. Mizvah Samech Bet number 62. We have a unique mizvah. We'll call this another accessory called Misvah of Korbanot. The Torah wants us to add salt on every korban that is offered. So every offering on the Mizbeach, on top of it, receives salt. V'hu amaro al kol korbanecha takriv melach. The Torah tells us very explicitly, on all your korbanot, offers salt. The Torah also, the Rambam doesn't bring this, calls salt relative to a korban, melach berit Elohecha. Salt, the covenant of God. There's a lot of interesting discussion about, what makes salt the covenant of God, but certainly in the most simplistic way, salt, as we know in our regular dietary habits, refines food and brings it to a higher peak of quality and taste. And of course, we're offering our highest quality to the korban that we offer to Hashem. The Midrash and the Gemara Menachot elaborates further on this mitzvah. So we can call the last few, both the trumpets and now in the body of the korban, in terms of lack of blemish, in terms of age, and in terms of salt, the conditions and or accessories of the korbanot. Now we're going to get to the actual list of different korban categories, each one being at the status of a positive commandment. So Mizvat Samech Gimal, number 63. Hishasivanu b'maaseh korban ha'olah. In other words, the activity of bringing a korban olah, which is a completely burnt offering that is brought, as we've already mentioned, in the national, communal, constant daily korban, as well as the korban musaf, Shabbat, holidays, Rosh Chodesh. Those are all korbanot olah. Plus, individuals on certain occasions brings a korban olah. The very bringing of that is fulfilling Misvot aseh. V'hu kishiyeh kol korban olah shiyeh karev, yeh korban yahid or sibur, and that is whether it's an individual or whether communal korban, shiyeh al tenai kach v'kach v'al toar kach, meaning that if you bring it with the conditions spelled out by the Torah, in terms not only of what we just mentioned, of course, of the age and the body, but also every korban has its different characteristic regulations to it. Olah, as we just said, is a fully burnt offering. And after you remove the innards, you chop it up into chunks and pieces, essentially. And the Mishnah tells us what each piece is, and they're offered as a full burnt offering, meaning with no other parties eating it besides the Mizbeach devouring it. So, of course, there are rules and regulations. If you follow them, you're fulfilling a positive commandment when you bring your korban olah. What's the source? V'hu omro, adam ki yakriv mikem, etc. Im olah korbano. The Torah says, Parashat Vayikra, I read it a few weeks ago, that when you offer, if it's an olah, then follow these conditions. But when you say that, the Torah is also telling us that you're fulfilling a command when you bring the korban correctly. And we go into the next categories. Misvot HaMekdalet, number 64. Hi shesivanu shihiyeh maaseh korban hatat al hatoar haniskar is a hatat shihiyeh. Now, a hatat is a sin offering, sometimes brought communally on behalf of the entire nation, and that is within the Musaf service. And of course, individuals, most sin offerings are in the form of korban hatat. So if you bring it, as the Rambam just said, on the conditions and following all the regulations of the korban, in the respective type of korban hatat, because there are a number of different ones, you're fulfilling a misvat aseh. Source, v'hu omro, v'zot Torah hatat. At the end of the discussion, the Torah tells us all from the beginning that this is the instructions for the manual for bringing korban hatat. Umuvuar gam ken b'vayikra ech yikarev uma mimena yisaref uma yocham. Parashat Vayikra, it speaks of how to offer it, what should be burnt and what should be eaten, because what's different about a korban hatat than a korban olah is that the hatat, the sin offering, is eaten, its meat is eaten, part of its meat is eaten by the Kohanim, and therefore it's shared both by the altar, the Mizbeach, and the Kohanim. One more, which is related to it, Misvot Samechem number 65, Hishasivanu Shiyeh Maaseh Korban Ha'asham, Al HaToar HaNiskar Be'omro Zezot Torat Ha'asham. Also bringing a Korban Asham, which is more limited, right? The Mishnah tells us 5 or 6 types of Korban Asham that we bring. We also bring in Asham when we were in doubt as to whether we sinned. So it's almost like a holding period until you know whether you made a sin or not, and whether you have to bring a Korban Hatat, you bring in Asham. So if you bring it with the conditions and instructions of the Torah, you're fulfilling a positive commandment, as it says, Zot Torah Ta'asham. This is the conditions and instructions for bringing that type of korban. And the Torah itself explains how to offer it, what is burnt, and what is eaten. And like the korban hatat, the Kohen also eats part of the korban asham offering as well. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.